This is an edited book by some of the great writers whom I've put together. And this is a story of, in many ways, of what I've been through in my close to 40 years in government, and how India has transformed itself and what it needs to do to transform itself. You know, because I've grown in an era where I recall going and lining up before the telecom minister to get a connection for a telephone, in my house. And today we are a nation with a billion plus, 1.2 million mobiles, a billion plus biometrics, close to a billion plus bank accounts in India. So we are a nation which is truly transformed in many, many ways. And there's much more happening. And I would recall this story, I was used to, just before I'd worked in the tourism sector in Kerala, I was working in the fisheries sector of Kerala. And my job then was to enhance the returns of traditional fishermen. They used to get only about 18%, 20% of the market price of catch. And traditional fishermen used to bring their catch on baskets, on head baskets, and take buses and come to the city of Trivandrum and Cochin to sell in colonies. And there were about 15, 16 layers of middlemen in between. And we could provide, we formed self-help groups and we gave them outboard motors, we gave them fishing nets, we gave them new crafts to go much further into the sea. But one of the biggest nightmares for me then was getting bank accounts open, because the problem with fishermen, they used to drink a lot in the night and they would drink away all their earnings. So the challenge was to keep about 50% of their returns in their bank accounts and 50% for repayment of these assets, which we had provided them for. And opening their bank accounts was a nightmare. Know your customer was a nightmare. It used to take me 9 to 10 months of chasing physical bank managers to open their bank accounts. Just 2.5 weeks back, I walked into a bank account and on a handheld device, I opened my bank account using my biometric. In 55 seconds flat, I opened my bank account. So from 10 months, we've come to 55 seconds. That has been the transformation in India, because we've truly used technology to leapfrog. And many of us do not realize this, but actually India today has, we do more mobile data consumption. We are doing more mobile data consumption than USA and China put together. And our download of apps is the highest in the world today. We've truly, technologically leapfrogged through the mobile telephony. And therefore, India in the last few years has truly been there's been a massive, massive transformation. And how we use technology to transform India will be critical. Because what we'll throw up in the days to come, I've seen government transforming itself, because when I started my career, central government used to transfer money to the state used to transfer money to the district to the block, and many of you would have recalled Rajiv Gandhi's famous statement that only 15 paisa actually reaches the poor beneficiary. But today in 500 schemes of the government, we are transferring money straight into the bank account of the beneficiary. So close to over 2.5 trillion rupees has been transferred straight into beneficiaries' account, whether it's scholarship, whether it's different schemes, 500 schemes, and 90,000 crores has been saved simply because money has gone straight in and there has been no leakage. So India is digitally becoming a very, very, very efficient economy. And my view is that the simple process of digitization, whether many Indians don't realize it, but 98.3% of Indians pay income tax online. The public finance management system of government ensures that everything is released digitally. So you can track everything moving in the government. The goods and services tax, which is totally getting digitized, will throw up a huge amount of data. And now the new Ayushman Bharat scheme, which the Prime Minister will be launching tomorrow in Jharkhand, in Ranchi, actually what it will do is to link up 150,000 local primary health centers to the district hospitals. So the poor people who used to go to the primary health hospital where, you wouldn't have a doctor, because the basic problem in the health schemes in India is that you either don't have a doctor, or you don't have a machine, or you have a machine, the nurse is not there to give injection, or the machine is not operational. All this will be linked to the district hospital digitally. And you can get any kind of medical advice from specialists from the district hospital. And almost close to 500 million people, 50 crore people, that is almost 42% of your population, is being provided with the new health insurance scheme, which is being launched tomorrow. So these are very transformative days in India, and this will all throw up massive data. GST, income tax, health, all this. And this will lead to huge amount of data analytics. This will lead to great amount of artificial intelligence. And all this will bring in immense efficiency in the years to come, because financial inclusion, you will not have to run around. Bank managers, physical bank managers will be dead. Physical banks will die. And those who not keep ahead with digital technology will not be able to survive in the days to come. And therefore, these are very, very transformative days, simply because my view has been that this is all happening because India is passing through a window of demographic transition which rarely happens in history. The average age of our population is 29. 72% of the people are below that age, and this will remain so for till 2042, whereas the western part of the world is growing. They're all aging. 8,000 Americans are retiring a day, 8,500 Germans are retiring a day. So while India will keep getting younger and younger, the western part of the world will keep growing older and older and older. And therefore, younger India will be far more aspirational, and the younger India will be far more digital. And this will enable India to leapfrog in many, many ways. So the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is that while we are growing at about 7.5% per annum, last quarter we grew at 8.2% per annum, but the challenge is that we should grow at 9 to 10% year after year, year after year, year after year for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very young population below the poverty line and make them rise above the poverty line. But this would require many things to happen. And I think the first and foremost challenge before the country to be able to do this is that our process of urbanization, whether we like it or not, will happen. And this will happen in a very big way. If you go by the latest McKinsey study, more than 500 million Indians will get into the process of urbanization in the years to come. In the next 5 decades, according to them, India will see over 500 million Indians getting into the process of urbanization. And therefore, when the western part of the world urbanized, land, gas and water were cheaply available. They could create cities like Atlanta, where 98% of the people travel by cars. You had limousines, you could buy gas cheaply. All this is scarce. Land, water, gas will be very difficult to get. And therefore, how India urbanizes in a very innovative and sustainable manner will be very critical. How we urbanize in a very, very sustainable manner. How do we recycle our water? How do we recycle our waste? How do we use sharing, connected, and a zero-emission method of transportation will all be very critical in the days to come. So, urbanization will be very critical to India's growth. Secondly, to my mind, the challenge will be that we'll see a lot of young people getting into the world of innovation, getting into the world of startup. We have the second best ecosystem in startup. Young entrepreneurs are doing some amazing work in a vast range of areas. There's a young girl called Pratna Bhandari who's taught 9 million through her app called Hello English. She's taught 9 million Indians how to speak English. She started with Mandarin, Japanese, ended up teaching English. 9 million. No school or college has been able to do this. There's a young boy who started, while in IIT Madras, started Author Engineering, where they've made this new scooter, which they've launched S340 in Bangalore, which has the potential to be the Tesla of the scooter world tomorrow. All electric scooter. And if you look at a range of innovations which young Indians are doing across health, for instance. Look at Consio Medical, or look at Mitra Biotech, which relocated from Silicon Valley into India. When we started the Startup India movement, many of our startups were going to Silicon Valley or to Singapore. Many of them are now relocating into India. And therefore, many of these Indians are doing, and Mitra Biotech is all about personalized cancer care. Or look at what what is happening in the education world. I mean, there's look at Baiju, for instance. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has invested his personal money in Baiju, and the way they have grown and expanded and making a difference to education. Or Imbibe, there's a young girl called Aditi Avasti who's using artificial intelligence to track every single student, much like we track Uber cars on longitude and latitudinal wise. So these are young Indians who are making a huge, massive difference. Or look at what is happening in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and which is now spreading to many other places, is about close to 1,100 multinational corporations who've relocated their R&D into India. And many of us do not realize this, but a vast number of innovations are actually happening in India for the entire world. So Honeywell's turbocharger, General Electric's low-cost ECG machine, they developed this ECG machine for $35,000 in the United States. They were able to do the same innovation for $3,000 in India, enabling them to do a ECG for $1 per patient instead of $30. Or John Decree's low-cost tractor, or a huge range of innovations that have happened in India. I was recently in Bangalore and I visited this Shell facility, the Shell Petroleum Company, which has converted waste into petrol and diesel and commercialized it. And they say that it's the biggest innovation they've carried out anywhere in the world in India. And that is converting waste into petrol and diesel at a cost which is very commercially viable. So a huge amount of innovation today is taking place in India for the rest of the world. My view is that India will become a very, very innovative country. We will continue to do innovation as young people will do more and more innovation for the rest of the world. So urbanization, your startup movement, your innovation ecosystem, all will be very critical. And simultaneously, you will see a lot of infrastructure being made. The challenge for India will be to do a lot of, I mean, look at the high-speed train between Mumbai and Delhi. Many of us would not have realized that we'll, as a country, we'll end up doing 100 smart cities. Or India is the only country in the world which is developing 50 metros. So Pune, Bangalore, Nagpur, all these cities, much like Noida, all of them are being linked up with metros. So you are seeing a huge amount of vast, creative, good infrastructure being developed across India. And this infrastructure will be truly world-class. The challenge will be to create world-class. But while we do all this, and while we take India to a high-level trajectory growth rate of 9 to 10%, there will be several challenges. And these challenges, to my mind, will be very critical. First and foremost, to my mind, the biggest challenge will be about gender equality, because in India, only 22% of the women work, unlike the rest of the world, where 48% of the GDP comes from women. And unless and until men as a conscious policy do not push for women to create greater levels of job and women as a key driver of economic growth, it will be very difficult for India to grow at high rates of 9 to 10%. And therefore, gender equality, consciously pushing for women to get into key positions of eminence and for them to drive economy will be very critical. We are just at 22%. If we were to reach, say, 40%, India will add $700 billion to its economy. And therefore, it's not possible for India to grow. And much of this has to be driven by men. And therefore, to my mind, gender equality will be or gender empowerment will be a very critical policy of our growth policy. Secondly, it's not possible for India to grow at high rates for a very long period of time if we are not able to transform several districts of India, and we've done this analysis. There are about close to 200 odd districts which are keeping India backward. And these are districts where several factors merge together. They're very backward in education. They're very backward in health standards. They're very poor in nutrition. And if nutrition, look at nutrition, for instance, today. I mean, 1 in 2 women in India is anemic. 1 in 3 children are stunted. 1 in 4 children are wasted. And therefore, we need a huge focus on these. If you were to look at a map of India, there are close to about 200 districts which are totally red on all these parameters. So one of the key programs this government has launched is an aspirational district program. We don't call them backwards, but we call them aspirational, where we are monitoring these districts, ranking them, monitoring their performance on a daily basis, putting their performance out on a monthly performance sheet. And we're putting them out so as to create a sense of competition amongst these districts. It's very important. And to my mind, unless we are not able to convert these reds into green, these districts into green, and many of these districts actually lie in the eastern part of India rather than the southern part of India. We've seen huge progress in social indices in southern part of India, but huge backward movement in health, education, and nutrition in several districts of the eastern part of India. And therefore, we need to ensure that these grow and prosper, and that will ensure that India has growth with equity. You can't have growth without inclusion. You can't have a scenario where you have vast levels of growth and a vast levels of poverty in other areas. And therefore, pushing for aspirational districts to grow, pushing for education, pushing for better learning outcomes where we perform very badly, pushing for better health, infant mortality, pushing for better maternal mortality, pushing for better health standards, and putting for better nutrition results so that women are not anemic anymore, ensuring that women get and children get immunization is very critical to India's growth story. And the third critical aspect, and therefore I'm a great believer that you can't have growth without Human Development Index. And that's born out of my conviction of having lived a vast part of my life in Kerala, where I've seen growth with education, with health, and with nutrition. And the third part of the story is that no country in the world has grown without exports in a very big way. Post-World War II, if you look at it, Japan, Korea, China, all grew on the back of exports without, so people produce, if you have to produce to size and scale, and you use your domestic market as a base for penetrating global markets. Without penetrating global markets, it will be very difficult for India to grow on a long-term basis. Japan did this, Korea did this, China did this for a very long while. We've been growing on the back of our domestic market. It's not possible. Indians must have the ambition, Indians must have the hunger, Indians must have the big will to penetrate global markets. And as many young people keep getting into innovation and entrepreneur, it's very important to understand that the whole world is our market. We must penetrate global markets. And unless we don't do this, it will be very difficult to sustain our growth over a long period of time. So these are very challenging times. India has a lot of positives, but there are various challenges before this. It requires the will not only of the central government, but of several state governments which combine together. What the path ahead does is to put all these various essays together. It brings out all the stories of Human Development Index. It brings together all the stories of our growth. It brings together all the stories of India's challenges together. And what are the transformative ideas which are critical for India to grow on a rapid pace? If India was to grow at 9 to 10%, what are the transformative ideas? It's not possible for any country to constantly grow without great ideas and transforming these ideas into great implementation. It's not possible for any country to grow without research and development. It's not possible to grow without innovation. And what this book does is to put this all together, that if India was to grow at 9 to 10% over a 3-decade period, what does it need to do to transform India over a next 3-decade period so that it can be one of the biggest wealth creators of the world? But as per PwC's latest studies, it will grow at the highest rate by 2050. But if India is to do this, there are several challenges which have to be met. And what are those challenges which must be totally overcome by India, are all captured in this book. And I would recommend that it has some of the wonderful essays by some of the most exciting people in India today, across rural development, across social development, and many other areas. So let me conclude. I was just showing this big board saying that my time has come to an end. So let me conclude. Let me conclude with this saying by this 14th century Indian poet, and he was a Muslim, but he wrote, his ancestry was Turkish. He wrote in the Persian language, 14th century India, and this was Amir Khusro. And writing of 14th century India, he said that a Muslim writing in the Persian language, ancestry was Turkish, and writing of 14th century India, he said, how exhilarating is the atmosphere of India. There cannot be a better teacher than the way of life of its people. If any foreigner comes by, he'll have to ask for nothing because they treat him as their own and teach him how to smile like a flower. So ladies and gentlemen, the atmosphere in Noida at this golf club is truly exhilarating. And I think many of you are smiling like flowers. So it's been a great pleasure meeting and interacting with you. And I'd be very happy to respond to any queries that you may have. Thank you very much, ladies.